What if there were one thing that if you reliably did it every week would help you to feel more relaxed and happy and fulfilled? What if there were one thing that if you really committed to practicing week by week by week would reliably improve your relationships with your family members and friends? No, I'm not talking meal prep, I'm not talking making calls every Sunday or taking a day to clean your house. I'm not even talking about exercising or anything like this. I'm talking practicing. Welcome to Ponder and Practice. If you're here looking for answers, I hate to say you're in the wrong place. Hey there, I'm Catherine, and it's my hope that you have more questions than answers by the end of this episode. I'm here to help ignite your curiosity and facilitate honest and nuanced conversations so that you can more thoughtfully navigate all of the complexities of life. Keeping a Sabbath as a tradition is something that transcends and crosses spiritual and religious traditions. This isn't something that is limited to any particular religious tradition, and it's not something that you have to be at all religious or spiritual to engage in. Rather, this is a practice just of unplugging and taking a day off from everything helps to reset us in a world with constant overstimulation and pressures from home and work and even our own expectations of how our lives are supposed to be set up, how they're supposed to look. Taking a day off allows us to come back to ourselves, to recenter ourselves and ground ourselves in who we are, where we are, what we are, and reassess where it is that we're trying to get to in the first place. Now, as a kid, I grew up Christian and we went to church every Sunday, and I never really enjoyed church very much. But what I did really love was the ritual that followed after church. And this was, we came home, we pulled out all of the sandwich stuff, the bread, the lunch meats, all the condiments, chips, what have you, and we would sit around the table, pass around different sections of the newspaper, and make our sandwiches and read the paper. After lunch, we'd all sort of drift off to our different corners. I would grab a book and sit and read and maybe have a nap, this kind of thing. But it was a day for us to just be off from everything. Now, at that time, cell phones weren't really a thing like they are now, and we did have a computer, but we just had one in the house. We weren't all glued to tablets or any of this. It just didn't exist at that point. And so over the years, of course, the technology has changed and our routines changed as our family evolved and grew. As I got through different places in school, high school, college, and whatnot, Sundays really became more for like homework, catching up around the house, this kind of thing. A few years ago, I read the book 24/6, The Power of Unplugging One Day a Week by Tiffany Shlain. Our family tried it. We lasted a few weeks, a good solid effort, but it wasn't something that we stuck with long term. Now, what does it mean to have a Sabbath, quote unquote? Religiously, Sabbath or Shabbat, depending on your tradition, is a day that's set aside for rest and worship or religious study, or some combination thereof. Hence, church on Sundays or temple on Friday night or Saturdays. Sabbath, the word, comes from the Hebrew Shabbat, which means rest or cessation. Biblically, this comes from the creation story, in which the Creator, having spent days 1 through 6 creating, then rests on the seventh day. Routines, of course, vary based on the religious tradition, ranging from not using electricity at all, not doing any work at all, to simply going to church or temple or what have you, or simply resting around the house with family. A secular Sabbath can be whatever it is that you want it to be, but I encourage you, if you decide to take on this practice, focus on rest. Focus on having a break from your normal routines throughout the week. If you think about breathing, there's a natural pause that happens when you take a breath in, and we naturally pause, and then we exhale, and then there's a pause there. The Sabbath is akin to that pause between kind of your exhale and the next inhale for the next week. The benefits of Sabbath, religious, spiritual, or secular. One of the benefits of keeping a Sabbath or keeping a day set aside throughout the week is practicing a time-based boundary. This day is for me. It's for my family. It's for rest. It's for renewal. And no one else gets access to this. No social media feeds get access to this. No one at work gets access to this. This is for me and only for me. We humans are rhythmic beings, and we need regular periods of exertion and work coupled with periods of rest and relaxation. Of course, we have our daily rhythms or circadian rhythms where we wake up in the morning. There are hormonal changes that kind of help to wake us up in the morning, and then we work throughout the day, and then in the evening we wind down and go back to sleep. Throughout the year, of course, we also have rhythms. We're coming into winter, which is a natural time of less activity where we're pulled sort of downward into rest naturally with the season. Keeping a Sabbath on a weekly basis helps to remind us that we do need these periods of deeper rest. We do need times where we're not doing, where we're not going, where we're not beholden to anyone. And speaking of rest, deep rest is something that is missing from our culture in a really big way. We are plugged in all the time, every day. And so keeping a Sabbath really does help to protect that space and make room for the rest that you need. Keeping a Sabbath helps to create that space for deep rest. There's a lie in our culture that we don't need very much sleep. Oh, I can get by on 6 hours of sleep. I can get by on 5 hours of sleep. I don't need periods of rest. I have to be on all of the time because of insert reason, work, family, what have you. The truth of the matter is that we do need that deep rest. We do need a fair bit of sleep, and particularly in the winter, a season that calls us to more rest, keeping a Sabbath is a great way to practice. Let me make time for that rest. Let me prioritize it and see how my life improves when I actually allow myself to get it. Something that I have found over the last few months in my own practice of keeping a Sabbath is that it helps to nurture some independent thought. As we are all plugged into different forms of media and algorithms and whatnot, if you can take a day, even just one day a week, off of devices, off of social media feeds, off of news feeds, off of all of these different inputs, it really helps to reacclimate yourself to being able to hear your own thoughts. Well, what do I think about this particular thing? If I let my mind wander, where does it naturally go? Where do my curiosities actually lie? Because it may or may not be where the internet and the media is telling you that they should or that they do. And so keeping a day unplugged helps to re-establish your own intellectual curiosities and priorities. Taking a day away from all of these other inputs help create some space to return to your own inner wisdom and knowing, which is so crucially important, particularly through the winter. So how do you keep a Sabbath, right? If you're watching this video, I assume that you are someone who is not necessarily religious. Maybe you are a little bit spiritual, but not overly spiritual. And this is sort of a new idea that you're thinking of trying out. And so how do you put this into place? How do you figure out what will make sense for you? Religiously, there are some very strict traditions or rules or guidelines that folks are expected to follow depending on the tradition. But if you're coming from a more secular place and just looking to feel a little bit better in your day-to-day, this is going to look a little bit different. So the first thing to think about is, what are you hoping to get out of your day of rest? Are you just hoping to have a day where you're unplugged, where you can take a nap and kind of just do what you want without being beholden to anyone else? The other thing to think about is, what are you willing or unwilling to change? What are the aspects that stand out as particularly high yield changes that you are resistant to? So for example, if you're someone who habitually is scrolling Instagram and part of a high yield strategy for you on your Sabbath would be to unplug from social media and stay off of Instagram for the day, this may generate some anxiety. But this is something that will probably be of immense benefit. And so what are you resistant to, if anything, and why might that be? These are good reflection questions. Even if you never end up unplugging for a whole day, this can be a useful exercise to kind of go through and see what changes are you wanting and what changes are you willing to make, and where is there an alignment or misalignment there. I would then pick a day. And so this is going to vary depending on schedules. If you work on Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, of course, Saturday and Sunday are obvious choices. If you have a background in a particular religious tradition, like if you were raised Christian, Sunday might be the day that you go for. Over the last few months, I personally have settled on Saturday being my day off. The next thing to consider is, what are your parameters? So for me, from dinner on Friday to dinner on Saturday, I am off of everything. There is no housework, there is no work. All of my screens are turned off and put away. I take off my Apple Watch, my computer is shut down, I don't have a tablet out, I'm not cooking, I'm not doing dishes, I'm not emptying the dustbin on my robot vacuum. I am unplugged from all of it. And are there exceptions? So in as much as I don't tend to have screens up on my day off, I do make an allowance periodically for my Kindle because I have books on there. I like to read. And I may also make an allowance for my phone because there are some religious or spiritual services that I will stream on my phone because there's an app. But aside from that, those are really the only allowances that I make. Perhaps you will take calls from family, but not from coworkers. Maybe you have to be on call for work or something like this, but you're going to abstain from scrolling on social media. Whatever your situation, there are ways to kind of make this work and really take a day to let there be a little bit of a different flow. You may also think about your exercise routine. I don't work out on my day off typically. I may take the dog for a walk, but aside from that, I'm not really doing a whole heck of a lot. Some folks, they're like, oh yeah, I love to go exercise, and so I have the time and the space on this day off, and so that's going to be a big part of it. And so it's going to look different for you. It's really important, whatever you decide on, to take some time and think about what are the things that are going to help me get rest. And that rest may look a little bit different, and it's going to change most likely from season to season throughout the year as well. So it's working for someone now, may not work, come June or July. It's going to look a little bit different. Whatever you decide on, there's going to be a time where you're going to observe what happens, and then you're going to make some adjustments as you go. So there's not a right or wrong here, of course. And you do want to be able to identify what's working and what's not working. When it comes to keeping a Sabbath, good indications that this is going on a track that it's helpful include feeling relaxed during the day, even when, throughout the rest of the week, even when you're not on your day off, having some increased energy and interest to engage in hobbies or other enjoyable analog activities like painting or drawing or playing an instrument or dancing or gardening or putting records on, all these different kinds of things. Feeling actually rested and recharged the day after and throughout the week. And also having an improved sense of competence and or an ability or willingness to take on the week. A lot of times when we're going 7 days a week, it all runs together, and it's just exhausted day to exhausted day to exhausted day. And so a good signal that your Sabbath is working for you is that, yes, I feel ready for the week ahead. I feel like I have the energy and the capacity to take on what I need to be able to take on in this next week. And then you may need to make some tweaks. This is an iterative process if you're coming at it from a secular point of view or sort of a generally spiritual point of view. And so you might notice if you're reluctant to put your phone away for the day and notice that you're not really feeling any different on your Sabbath or throughout the week, maybe you need to start putting your phone away on that day. Or maybe you start putting your phone away for, between the hours of when you wake up until noon on that day. And then see how you feel. Maybe you still won't feel any different, and then you experiment like, okay, let me just put my phone away for the whole day and see how that does. I would be surprised if someone didn't feel any different with that, but maybe you won't. And you're like, okay, well, let me just keep my phone and see what else is here that I can adjust. I noticed for myself, we had a family event a few Saturdays ago, and I wasn't really able to rest and recuperate and sit in front of the fire, read my book and have some coffee and do all the things that I like to do on my Saturdays. And my whole week was off after that. We were traveling on that particular day, and the whole week, I just was like, oh gosh, it's just not quite right. Obviously, I was able to do all the things I needed to do, but just felt a little bit off kilter. Similarly, a couple of weeks ago, I found myself somehow on Instagram and YouTube on my, for the first part of my morning, and my thoughts were really focused on what I had scrolled through and watched, and I didn't feel rested really at all. I felt much more drained by the end of the day. So, all of that said, by way of conclusion, keeping a Sabbath is, of course, often, but doesn't have to be, a religious tradition. Excuse me. It can look however you want it to look. Do be honest with yourself, though, if you're reluctant to sort of, quote, go all the way with it. Be honest about what you are anxious about, what you're worried about. Why are there things that you're willing to not put away? Of course, if folks have small kids, turning off your phone is not necessarily going to be something that you're going to want to do in case something happens with your kids, and that totally makes sense. But if you are thinking, oh my gosh, work might need me, but really Do they? Sometimes the answer is yes, and more often the answer is no, they really don't. You can turn off your phone and your email and it's going to be fine. So be honest about those things. None of this is right or wrong, but you will naturally get more from the process the more committed you are to it. Now, the last thing that I'll say about it is that we're really not meant to be at full power or activity all of the time. Practice keeping a Sabbath is a great habit to start, particularly in this winter season, given that this time of year is one that really calls us to rest and recuperate and rejuvenate. The light outside gets less, and we have to learn to develop and lean on our own inner light throughout this season. Keeping a Sabbath on a weekly basis is a way to cultivate and develop and learn how to lean on that inner light that you naturally have.